This is a hard parable, but it's a good one. It names stubborn truths, demonstrates God's grace, and yet also stridently prophesies the need for change. The fig tree exists for a purpose, to bear fruit. And if it cannot or will not bear fruit, then the owner is faced with a dilemma. Why keep this tree which does not fulfill its purpose? The parable literally says, why should it be wasting the soil? Presumably, that real estate could be put to better use. Now, thankfully, there is a worker in the vineyard who wishes to advocate for the tree, and he begs for one more year. Give this tree one more year so that it might fulfill its purpose and bear fruit. And while this request is granted, it does not mean that things will simply continue on as they had before. The worker has promised to dig up the ground around it and pour manure over it. It's not a year-long reprieve in which things can revert back to the old normal, but a year of significant change. Now, interpreting parables is always a questionable art. I try to avoid it whenever possible. But this one seems rather straightforward in its context. Rightly or wrongly, the fruitless fig tree is the Israelite people, the Galileans, or humanity more broadly, who have seemingly not been fulfilling their divine purpose. God is the farmer who is considering renouncing the covenant and cutting this tree down to make space for a new crop that will actually produce a yield. And Jesus is the worker in the vineyard, interceding for our people and asking for more time, but with the promise that the necessary work will be done to make this tree bear fruit once more. He will dig up and aerate the ground around its roots. He will gather up manure from the sheep and the pigs and saturate the soil in an attempt to reintroduce the nutrients that are needed for this tree to grow, for it to begin to find and fulfill its purpose once more and bear fruit. This is an important and unavoidable story for all believers because it expresses a fundamental truth about the life of discipleship. Faith isn't about just being saved and going to heaven. And the church ain't a social club. We each have a specific purpose to which God is calling us. And we as a church have a mission that we have been uniquely tasked with. In our own spiritual life, we've been called into deeper relationship with God, from which we will attain incredible joy in the fulfillment of our purpose, our calling. Calling isn't just reserved for clergy. We're all Christian ministers of the gospel. But collectively, whatever the specifics of our individual church vision statements, I think the mission statement of the United Methodist Church is very helpful. We are called to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. It sounds like fruit to me. That is the fruit which our fig tree was intended to yield. And if we aren't bearing fruit, whether individually or collectively, then something needs to change. There is grace, thank God, but something needs to change. And if the story is accurate here, it will probably be messy. Some old things will need to be dug up. Some new things will need to be introduced to the environment to give the tree the nutrients it needs to grow again. Isn't that the way with all growth, though? I feel rather secure in suggesting that for each of us, the times when we have experienced the most personal growth and development have been precisely during and immediately after those times of significant challenge in our life. Seasons when the old patterns have suddenly stopped working and we're forced to find new ways to move through the world. Just from my own experience and those of close friends and family, I can point to the death of family members, parents, the breakdown of marriages and relationships, the loss of jobs or housing, the transition of careers or state residency or annual conferences. These are all times of incredible growth. They're incredibly hard events, but if we heed the sacred voice that's calling us in the midst of them, they're all the events that have prompted us to grow and shaped us. They've shaped us into the disciples we are today. And God loves us in our messiness. This Christianity thing, this faith thing, isn't a sanitary experience all the time. I recently had someone exclaim to me, "I blew up my life!" And rather than being a shameful thing, that might just be exactly what was needed. Because if we have not been fulfilling our purpose, if we have not been heeding our calling, then we may be like that fruitless fig tree that God is eyeing with a critical gaze. And yes, again, thank God for the intercession of Christ, that extra time we've been allotted. But it's simply not satisfying. It's not good to just limp along, half alive and purposeless. It's not a good way to live. But it takes work to make a change. Some old things will need to be dug up, and some new things will need to be introduced in order to live again, to grow again. And I dare say the willingness to embrace the mess and to listen to the voice of God calling out to us in times of change is a high indicator of spiritual maturity. About a month ago, I had the opportunity to interact with retired Bishop Robert Schnese. He's a very highly regarded leader of the church who has written many very highly regarded books, including The 5 Practices of Fruitful Congregations. Those practices are radical hospitality, passionate worship, intentional faith development, risk-taking mission and service, and extravagant generosity. I want to say them again. Radical hospitality, passionate worship. Thank you, Debbie, for leading us in passionate worship. Intentional faith development. Thank you, Tim and Sue, for leading us in intentional faith development. Risk-taking mission and service. Thank you, Judy and Nancy, for leading us in risk-taking mission and service. And that final one, extravagant generosity. We have a number of extravagantly generous people. I'm not going to name who they are. I'm not going to go into each of these. We don't have time for that. But what I want to commend to you is that Bishop Schnese, throughout his ministry, found that these 5 traits were commonly held among all of the churches that he either was in or led as a bishop that were purpose-filled, fruitful, growing churches. They put a premium on being open and welcoming people who are outside of the church and willing to be changed by welcoming them in. They were passionate about worship and the holy transformation that can take place when we encounter God in this time together. They were serious about growing in their faith and embracing opportunities for continuing education and discipleship. They were excited and willing to take risks to make a difference in the world around them through mission and ministries of service and justice. And they were able to reject the scarcity mindset and take on practices of extravagant generosity. And what I want you to notice is that every single one of those tenets has change, transformation, or difference built into them. None of them involve just stagnating and keeping on, keeping on. Here's what Bishop Schnase wrote at the close of the book. To fulfill the ministry of Christ, congregations must change and grow and adapt in ways that are purposeful, thoughtful, and faithful. Change is not easy. People do not fear change as much as they fear loss and the letting go of comfortable and familiar patterns, behaviors, and attitudes. Change, for the sake of change or to preserve the institution, is not sufficient. Change takes many forms, and each congregation must find its own path, pervaded by the purpose of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Fruitful congregations discover new life, readily giving up the patterns that have limited ministry, and eagerly taking up those that invite people into relationship with God. They open themselves up to being reshaped by God's Spirit, revived and reformed to serve the ever-changing contexts and needs of people. Fruitful congregations embrace change. They embrace the mess. Isn't that just like the parable we've heard this morning? Individually and collectively, by the grace of God, we have the opportunity to respond to God's calling and reclaim our holy purpose. We have the opportunity to be a people who bear fruit again, but it will require change. It always requires change. Even when you are fruitful and growing, it requires change. Because growth is change. Never-ending transformation. And it's probably going to be messy. But it's not a purposeless mess. Rather, it's intentional disruption to the patterns and habits we've fallen into. And that is the domain of faithful stewardship, because our mission isn't just to keep the doors open. Our mission is to introduce people to the radical, transformational love of Jesus Christ and to support and hold accountable all those who, with us, pursue the path of discipleship. And that takes work. It takes the worker in the vineyard coming around and digging up the ground around the roots and pouring over it with the manure. I don't love saying that word, but I haven't been able to find a substitute. So let us thank God for the fig tree, for the time and opportunity we have been granted to reclaim our purpose. But let us also make the investments and the work necessary to change, transform, and grow again.